Hey everyone, welcome back to the AI Pulse podcast. From Skynet fears to Star Trek dreams, AI's future is here, and it's rewriting the rules of business and society. So buckle up as we dive headfirst into this first episode of the year for 2025. I'm Max. As of today, I will not be flying solo anymore on this podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome our new co-host, the brilliant Dr. Marlene Wolfgruber. Marlene, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Max. I'm super excited to join AI Pulse today and in the future as your co-host and bringing my NLP and digital transformation hat to the party. I think it could be a better topic to start off my co-host career here with this exciting topic about AI predictions and trends for 2025.
We didn't just have you for this actual topic. We also have two amazing guests, which is Ema Roloff, digital strategist and transformation leader, and Alexander Hanff, a true guru in data privacy and AI governance. Ema, welcome to the podcast. Would you mind just introducing yourself briefly to the audience that we've got today?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I have a little over 10 years. I just crossed the 10-year mark of enterprise technology and digital transformation space. In a past life, I used to work very closely with the ABBYY team selling their solution as well as other enterprise class software solutions into different industries. Over the last couple of years, have since kind of moved more into the keynote speaking and consulting side of things. And so the co-founder of Roloff Consulting, creatively named by my husband and I, because we are the two that are the masterminds behind things. And we focus on sales and marketing in the digital world. On the speaking side, I focus on the idea of change management and AI and kind of where humans and technology come together.
Well, that's the perfect topic for today. Our other dear guest is Mr. Alexander Hanff. Alex, you want to say a few words about who you are and why you're here?
So I'm Alexander. I've been a computer scientist for over 30 years now. I first started looking at AI in my late teens, early 20s. I've worked in privacy governance and law for the last 20 years, heavily involved in the development of EU law as an advisor to the European Commission, European Parliament, and the European Data Protection Board. I use it every single day. I also run my own consultancy named very similarly Hanff & Co. AB because it's myself and my wife who are the brains behind it. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, as all the other conversations I've had with Max and Abby over the last 12 months.
That's great. And I think maybe one let's say disclaimer for the session. Our goal today is really, look or talk beyond the hype and not use buzzwords, because we really want to break down AI's real world impact in a way that's more practical. This is why we have both of you here. We want to figure out where AI is headed and how to stay ahead of the game without feeling like we're drowning in all the hype and buzzwords. So that's really the goal for today.
Yeah, all the same, I will have to use a few buzzwords just to set the stage for the first topic nonetheless, such as we saw AI explode in 2024. We've had all different kinds of shapes and sizes of large language models by everybody trying to create one. Generative AI tools like Sora, which really blew my mind. I was at the New York AI Summit in December. That was the talk of the town for businesses. It's a race to adopt AI. How are we going to be able to keep up with it? I think that's one of the main topics that we want to start with, the current state of AI as to how all of that's going.
Yeah. And Ema, I know that you've been working closely with a lot of leaders. Would you see from your perspective, are businesses managing the flood of AI tools without overwhelming their teams because they want to implement something, but how to do it without overwhelming them?
So I think what I find really fascinating is that I think most companies are pumping the brakes. The AI adoption is being led more by their team and people on their team that are interested and excited to take advantage of AI. There are some companies that have very robust strategies around how and where they're leveraging AI or maybe building out their own solutions. But by and large, at least in the insurance industry, where I do a lot of work, and other regulated industries, there's still a lot of hesitancy around jumping feet first into what's going on. The risk of having the individuals lead the way is that it kind of it's a shadow IT on steroids, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And especially when we start to talk about agentic AI, the amount of hype that's surrounding that and the amount of point solutions that are popping up all over the place that can solve one specific problem for you. If it's not led from an enterprise standpoint, we're just creating this massive amount of spread in terms of who's using it, who's not, what are the use cases, do we actually have an understanding of how it's being used. I'm sure Alex's thoughts on data privacy and whether we're using it from an appropriate standpoint with what we're sharing with open source models. So I think we're still, at least from what I can see, companies are having a conversation of how and where do we adopt it. They've maybe got some pilots going on, but I don't know of many organizations that actually have a strong enterprise-wide approach to how they're managing AI. And then their employees are kind of clamoring, either afraid of it or wanting quickly to adopt it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that's kind of the evolution that we've been going through. I loved how you put it, that the employees are definitely on the side of either very cautious and nervous about what kind of impact that it will have. And on the other side, there's employees like me that are like, I want to automate everything that I can. I'll use all the tools that are at my disposal. At the same time, that, that trust in AI is something very fragile. So, Alex, I know you've got comments on this one. How are companies addressing the growing skepticism around AI decision making and the regulations coming into play? I saw an article just this morning about how it can go back to the original developer that may have made a mistake in the compliance chain that will make the whole solution, as good as it may be, non-compliant. And that I think is a massive impact. I don't think we've ever put the onus on the actual developers, only the companies.
I think I'm seeing kind of mixed attitudes, and depending on the type of client. So enterprise clients, I'm still seeing really heavily grasping AI. I have some clients who have literally dozens of AI projects across the globe. From a compliance perspective, we're often the last ones to be involved. And some of my smaller clients, they're not using AI at the enterprise level, but the employees are using it for all sorts of different things. So the shadow IT situation that Emma mentioned. And even in the big enterprise clients, again, we're seeing the organized procurement process around AI. At the enterprise level, we're still seeing a lot of shadow IT with individuals using AI for their specific tasks. I use AI every day. I recently created an automation workflow for doing privacy audits of websites, which has saved one of my clients probably millions of dollars a year in compliance costs for manual audit of those processes. I manage many hundreds of websites for clients across the world. So you can imagine auditing all the code, which is what should be done when you do compliance, not just checking a box on a configuration. Modern engineering techniques such as minification of scripts and bundling of scripts, it can be very difficult to audit them manually. From a compliance perspective, there's a number of problems. The training, the certifications for AI governance are incredibly poor. I just recently sat the IAPP governance training in Brussels at the European Congress. I wrote an article about it. I was that disappointed with it. It was very high level, nothing really actionable from a compliance perspective. This certification is likely to be one of the leading certifications in the privacy and data protection compliance space for AI, which is worrying. I know that there are some universities now who are introducing similar trainings. I haven't had a chance to evaluate those yet. I'm hoping that they're going to be far better than the professional certifications. But that's the first problem we face, a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge amongst the governance professionals who are not technologists, traditionally come from lawyer backgrounds or management consulting backgrounds without any real engineering skills or background, which is a huge problem, because if you don't understand the technology, how can you govern it? And if the training courses and certifications don't touch on the tech side, but are more focused on the standard management consulting side, project management, risk analysis, etc., then we're not really going to move the compass in any positive direction. The other issue is lack of resources within organizations. Still not enough resources being pumped in to compliance work. I know even in some of the big enterprise companies with billions of revenues, we still see very scarce resources for privacy and data protection compliance. We also see the growing trend that AI governance is being shifted onto the data protection officer, the privacy team within an organization, or the cybersecurity team. I don't think either of those are appropriate. I think AI governance should be managed by an AI team. But this is the way that it's going at the moment. And so we're now seeing not only are we responsible for managing all the international transfers of data, the liaison between the data subjects and the enterprise and the regulators and the enterprise and all the other things we have to do. Now we're responsible for AI, and AI that we know is not compliant in the way it was trained in many cases on these large language models. My own example being a perfect example of that, which I'm sure Max will go into later on. The result is we're now seeing enforcement around AI. We're seeing new guidance around AI. The EDPB just released the European Data Protection Board, which is made up of all the regulators across the EU. They just released guidance this week on AI and whether or not using personal data within AI can be done in a lawful way. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK just released some guidance, I think, yesterday on a similar issue. So we're now seeing a catch up with regards to the regulators on the information they're pushing out there, which is going to lead to more enforcement and more litigation and lawsuits as we move forward over the next 12 months. I would expect to see quite a lot of action from the regulatory space.
Can I just chime in and
Yeah.
double down on something Alex said about the education and understanding of the technology at the compliance level, but also just at the business leadership level in general? I think that is going to be one of our major hurdles. I always talk about this in the capacity of digital literacy and like how much our leaders, but employees of all shapes and sizes and different levels within a company, spending time actively going out to educate themselves on all types of emerging technology, to even understand what kinds of problems it can reasonably solve for them, where there are gaps in terms of what's hype and what's reality, and how things are going to come to fruition in their company. I think that's part of the reason I'm seeing the hesitancy with a lot of companies or small projects here and there, as opposed to more wide-reaching strategies that truly integrate with their business strategy and the goals of the organization. It's because of that foundational lack of understanding of the technology. I think that's really important, but it's broader than just on the compliance side. It's a challenge we have on the leadership side across the board.
I would agree with that for sure, because I think the most time that I've spent the last 12 months is simply the education piece of what exactly is artificial intelligence. Even just those basics of the huge array of different types of AI that's out there, when to use which one, when to apply what type of solution. Like you just said, Emma, is it's been like my main portion of my work. And it's been really interesting to see that even people that are rooted in technology simply don't know, because they've been, they've came into the business world right at the time that the whole hype cycle started, and they only have this tunnel vision of there's only one type, and that's the one that I have to use for absolutely everything. So that's quite interesting. Speaking of the things that we've seen in 24, before we go to the trends that we're predicting for 2025, I wanted to see if there's specific standouts from last year that you guys wanted to highlight. My standout was definitely the conversation I had in 2024, and Alex already alluded to it. Basically, ChatGPT pronounced them dead. The type of implications that would have if actually used for a decisioning system. At first it sounded like it's something very funny, but once he actually explained to me exactly what kind of impact that could have down the line if you go to automated decisioning based on these types of systems, that would have massive impacts for him. So that was my standout kind of conversation that I had in 2025, and we dedicated a whole session to it when we did the podcast at the Emirates Stadium earlier this year in London. But Emma, do you have a specific story that you'll always remember from last year that you're like, that's definitely something that was an eye-opener?
So I would say for me, it's actually a very recent event, and it here in the States had very massive rippling effects. And I'm sure that you guys also heard about it, specifically the implications of AI decision-making in denial of claims from United Healthcare as a part of that larger situation with the murder of the CEO recently. I spent some time looking into that situation because, as I'm sure you guys are familiar with, typically when I see headlines tied to AI and your job is disappearing and the world is ending, I tend to try and look a couple of layers deeper into what is actually being presented. A lot of the headlines talked about an AI meant to deny claims. I was like, that feels like a litigation nightmare, so I'm going to dig into it further. It brought up that in the lawsuits United Healthcare is in right now, it's being alleged that their AI model had a 90% error rate. To me, it's like, what company would willingly put a solution into production that has a 90% error rate? Was it developed for a specific cause, which is what a lot of people seem to believe, that it was meant for the purpose of denying? Was it not properly tested? Did they not actually have, and so looking into it, it was shocking to me to find out that the solution was put into production without any sort of human in the loop or audit process against the claims that were being denied, which again, in the property and casualty space, most of the insurance carriers that I've worked with will only do straight through processing for approved claims because they understand the dynamics of a denial happening based off of technology alone. So I was surprised to hear that that was something that was chosen. But the 90% error rate was not across all of the claims that the AI solution touched, but it was a 90% rate of overturning the denials when a human was put into the loop. So when somebody did appeal a denied claim, 90% of the time, if it had been denied by that AI solution, the decision was reversed after a human came into the loop. That use case causes so much damage to the trust of people with AI and decision making. There's all sorts of ethical things that we could open up, but also at what level do we want to make decisioning exclusive to the technology versus having humans in the loop, especially with something that comes to people's health and safety and typically has required so much empathy and human connection through that process. This is one of those things that will be very interesting to see play out. I think there will be a lot of information that comes out, kind of going back to some of the stuff that you were saying, like from the development standpoint forward, what directions were people given when they were asked to create this model? What was the intention of the tool in the first place? I think there's still a lot to be uncovered. I went in thinking these headlines are really salacious. There's no way that any of these claims are true. And then started digging and was like, oh man, this is worse than I thought it was. In the United States, we have a governing body called CMS that oversees all of our Medicare claims, which is the part that was being automated by the AI. Their average denial rate, like the average rate of basically reverting those decisions when a human is involved, was 14%. So we went from 14% of the reversal of a denial up to 90% through the use of the technology. To me, that means the technology wasn't at the point where it should have been used in production, and it shouldn't have been used in the capacity that it was. Seeing that play out and doing some of the digging was disappointing and eye-opening, but I also am concerned about what that means for the trust of technology and AI moving forward.
Yeah, I think that whole story definitely created a shockwave and a lot of raised eyebrows. Marlena, what's your standout story from 2024?
Before I rejoined ABBYY, worked for a conversational AI provider or platform provider. One of the things is definitely coming from the AI agents world is that I've seen people jumping on this topic without thinking about what problem they wanted to solve. I've seen large companies with hundreds of developers start building solutions without really knowing if that's the solution for their problem. They just wanted to use the technology. They wanted to get hands on the technology and started to spend resources, not in terms of software, because they always try to do everything open source first or get their hands on some trial versions. But they started to build whole solutions because they thought, okay, that's the next big thing. And then the big hesitance and you were saying pumping the brakes. They were pumping the brakes because they thought, oh, maybe there's some issues we didn't think about, like compliance, hallucinations, all those type of things, especially when it comes to applications that are customer facing. Yeah. That I think was mind-blowing that they haven't thought about this first, because before investing, and then actually circling back to the start and now maybe rethinking the whole thing. And maybe this year they're going to take a different approach to this whole thing, hopefully.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that going on. I think those realizations really are kicking in. Alex, what was your realization from 2024 if you had to pick one? You can't tell the chair story. I know that was a definite realization that you're going to go for, but you can't tell that one.
There isn't really one story, but there are several topics which have come up very clearly, certainly over the past 4 to 6 months. around the use of AI and various algorithms within social media platforms such as TikTok to influence and manipulate people during elections. In fact, the Romanian election was cancelled as a result of influence on TikTok, which was algorithm driven, so it was almost definitely AI driven with regards to a very populist figure who had no history in politics whatsoever, suddenly becoming a massive leader in the elections there, who was very pro-Russia. We obviously saw the outcome of the US elections in November, again, heavily influenced on social media. And we're seeing this populist movement again across the EU and various other parts of the world, like South Korea, for example, and everything which has happened there in the past couple of weeks. So the use of algorithms for manipulation, which is something that we've warned against for a very long time in the tech sector. If you're looking at error rates, as Emma was discussing earlier, I fought very hard against the proposal by the European Commission to introduce a new law around child sexual abuse material. The law was heavily reliant on really bad AI solution, which had a large number of false positives, but was dealing with hundreds of millions of images every single year, potentially billions. So even when you have an error rate of 10%, when you're looking at that number of individuals, that translates into millions of people being prosecuted or investigated for something that they haven't done purely as a mistake of an algorithm or an AI system, which has flagged them because it's not been appropriately trained or isn't competent to do the task that it's been set up to do. So, as a human rights activist and somebody who's been working in human rights for 20 years, but also as a technologist, I have a huge appetite for technology. But at the same time, I spend most of my working day and personal time looking at the impact of technology on individuals and society and how that can harm us if it's not used appropriately and ethically. So sadly, we're still seeing a trend of inappropriate use of AI. And a lot of the time, as Marlene mentioned, it's not even a case of there's a problem to fix. They're making problems that they can apply AI to, which actually aren't real problems in the first place. The motivation using AI is still very much focused on reducing costs, which always means reducing human headcount. But as we've already discussed, person in the loop is very important. When I was developing the solution for one of my clients around privacy audits, I made it very clear that this is going to save thousands of hours of manual labor in reviewing those websites and the source code, but we still have to do QA. And because we're using AI, we have to do even a higher level of QA than we would do under ordinary circumstances. Instead of doing 5 or 7% QA, we're doing 20 to 30% QA because we have to make sure that the output from these models is accurate. We're using a mixture of experts model for this, specifically on code and development of software. It's a lot better than using something like ChatGPT, but we have to make sure that the information we're getting back is accurate. So that means we have to invest in QA. AI should be used to make things more efficient, should allow us as individuals to work on more interesting and difficult tasks rather than the mundane. This is what automation is all about. Get rid of the mundane, allow us to focus on the things which are more interesting and can't necessarily be solved with AI. The examples given here today around healthcare should never be subject to an automated decision because there's no empathy in technology. Empathy is part of us as individuals, not something we can reproduce in technology. So I think as opposed to there being a single specific story, we're seeing the same stories over and over again on the same issues that we've had for the past 15, 20 years, which are now being translated into the AI space, which is a concern.
Go ahead, Emma.
Random acts of technology have been around for a long time. They're just happening now bigger and faster because
and at scale,
of the advancements within technology.
And also, I think much more in the picture for me is a huge difference that, we've had technology and all of us been working with it for a very long time, but now it's all much more front and center for, I would say, the main, everybody out there and main media, all the mass kind of people learning about it, understanding it and seeing those impacts. So that really creates a different kind of perspective. I don't know, Marlene, you wanted to say something as well.
No, just that I really think that it's more important than ever that the educational part of all of this is not forgotten about. And I mean, having those conversations, having this exchange, giving people that are looking for those type of solutions some more guidelines on each level. Because I think this is where people are really desperately looking. They start doing something out of fear. Their competitors are faster, smarter, and they want to stay ahead. But on the other side, what is it worth if you're just doing something and then in the end you're kind of, recognizing, oh, okay, actually that was a waste of time because we now have to do it properly again or reiterate. So why not do it right the first time, but, do it, more sustainable maybe, because I think that's really what this is about. And like getting the facts clear from the start and then doing it properly might take a little bit longer, but also is more future proof. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's super interesting.
No, I was going to say that the fear of looming obsolescence is
Yeah.
definitely a real thing, and it has been driving a lot of the decision making around these projects. But I will have to say, just to bring a positive note to all of it as well, is that if you do get it right, AI
Yeah.
can do some magical things. It can feel like magic if you do get it
Totally.
right. I think, Alex was ecstatic when he told me about how much time he was saving with all of his scripts that he was able to process. I was ecstatic when I was able to automate a big part of my workday, and it was working flawlessly. But it took time, it took effort, it took the ability to really go back and say, well, this result is just not good enough, so I'm not going to use it until I do get it right. With that outlook, we also prepared a couple of predictions from our side into what we're going to see in terms of cutting edge AI and trends into 2025. I think, Marlene, you had a couple that you wanted to share with the group today to see what the reaction is.
So I think it's super interesting to hear what was going on this year. And now thinking a bit more into the future, these 5 bold predictions that we think are going to reshape 2025 or this year is definitely still autonomous AI agents running workflows, your new virtual coworkers. Then AI will co-create content, not just text, but maybe also media like videos, ethics and explainability in AI won't be optional. This should be a standard part of the playbook. Enterprise automation is going to explode across industries. And then the last trend, and I personally like this the most because I think this is one where I think companies try to really differentiate themselves, is personalized AI will make customer experience feel, for once and final, if this is the right phrasing, feel truly one of a kind. Because I think personalization of customer experience is around for a long time, and companies are trying to really make it more and more personalized, especially when they advertising stuff. But I think this year could be really the year where it's getting some more traction.
I want to pick out one specific one and actually ask Emma a question about it, because I think that really is right up your alley. When it comes to autonomous agents and taking over, my personal view is it won't happen immediately, but it will get to that stage where they are really taking over entire workflows, entire processes, virtual coworkers, and perhaps even just supplementing the existing workforce. As you're working a lot with business leaders and or large organizations of all different kinds, how do you feel that they will react to that reality? Because technology moves whether we like it or not. That just happens. And you either adopt and you hope we adopt in the right way, or you don't, and you do then have to fear about looming obsolescence. So how do you feel that your people that you talk to daily will be able to go through that process of seeing this new type of workforce come in?
I think the companies that will manage this transition successfully will have leaders that are incredibly intentional with the way that they set a vision. They will be the leaders that learn from the lessons that we were just talking about from 2024 of like chasing shiny objects or random acts of technology just for the sake of being able to say that they're using AI. In order for this reality to play out the way I think we would all hope it to, we have to break some of those habits of leading with technology and go back to what both Alex and Marlene were saying, starting with a real problem. We have to lead with solutions that are actually providing benefit so that people start to use those solutions and rely on the technology. They have a favorable view of what it's doing, and that we actually get to the point of having technology delivering on the promise that we've been talking about. I started my sales career 10 years ago in enterprise technology, and the message was always, we're going to automate the mundane and remove the manual processes so that you can focus on higher value, higher meaning tasks, and really stuff that, again, allows us to be more human and focus on the things like empathy, creativity, or working on the business instead of in the business. That has been the promise since far before I was a part of the technology world. What I've seen happen is we've automated processes and reduced the need for manual tasks in certain areas, but really we've created new layers of complexity in almost everybody's job. When you look at somebody's work and the systems they have to use, the amount of times that they have to change tasks, the amount of times that there are new and different types of data or information driving decisions now that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago. We have added to the layers of complexity. So while certain things have fallen off of people's plates, we've continued to fill them with more tasks and more things. Just even think about your email inbox or the amount of Teams messages you get in a day.
Not to, Emma, to think about that. I really try not to think about
it just
that.
immediately gives you anxiety to think about the amount of connectivity and information and stuff that's coming at us all the time. Where we have an opportunity now with AI is to actually stop, take a moment and think about solving real problems so that when we implement this technology, we don't continue working through this same circle of insanity where we automate certain parts and add more to somebody's table. And we need to think about where can we actually add those pieces that are going to monumentally move like that manual work off so we can focus on those more human things or solving bigger problems or more complex problems, because there's plenty of work to do and humans love efficiency and we always find a way to level up when we have it. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity, but for us to do it the right way, we have to start with that real problem and start with a strong vision. What I see happening frequently is what you guys talked about, leaders chasing technology for technology's sake, and then having implementations that erode at this trust or create more complexity and don't solve problems. And that just breeds this sense of like resistance to change, which slows you down. Being able to chase what you're trying to accomplish brings in people that are going to just not adopt the solution. So more than just resistance, but like staying with their old tools because they know they can do what they need to, and all of this new stuff isn't going to get in their way. That visioning on the leadership side is the absolute most important part of getting us through that transition for people. And I just can't stress that enough. The amount, I mean, I've had conversations with people where they tell me they're looking for AI solutions. And I'm like, great, what problem are you trying to solve? And they're like, the board told us that we need to make sure that we're using AI. So now we're out looking for solutions. And I'm like, did you just hear yourself? Because this is not going to be a small endeavor. It's not going to be inexpensive. That ability to actually be thoughtful in the way that we lead technology is going to be what differentiates the companies that get it and the companies that don't. That acceptance and adoption by the team also flows into all of the other areas of being able to think of new areas to bring it, make sure that it's being used ethically, make sure that we're using the right tools. It all starts with that vision and that leadership, actually taking the time to be thoughtful with it.
I've actually heard somebody tell me, we've already spent $1 million on Gen AI. Now go figure out how to actually consume it, which is just scary. That's exactly the other direction of what you're supposed to do, of everything you just talked about, which I fully agree with. So
I think shockingly, this is actually the standard, the task they get. It's like, do something with this and this technology. But Alexander, here's also one for you. I mean, we touched upon this with Emma's example, the ethical part of AI and AI adoption without strong ethics. You know, that's the question. It feels like a recipe for disaster. And what do you think for this year? What's the biggest ethical risk we're staring down in 2025? Like, what's coming up on the road?
Oh, there are many. It's multifaceted. I think we have to look at it holistically first and foremost. One of the things I've loved about 2024 is the emergence of open models and the ability to run AI at home. I know Max is super excited with his new Mac Mini M4 for running AI workflows and automation. I'm the same at home with my Mac Studio. I love the fact that companies like Apple are pushing out hardware which is very capable for running AI. But the reality is, for startups, for entrepreneurs, for academics, access to hardware for being able to scale AI projects is incredibly limited. It's controlled by a few very dominant players such as NVIDIA, and it's sold to a few very dominant players such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta, and a couple of other big global enterprises. So there's a monopolistic issue there with regards to access to the technology to allow for the true democratization of AI, which currently isn't occurring. It's a relief to see the emergence of a lot of open models to try and counter that. But even then, it's still not going to allow something to scale. And some of the licenses around those open models are not necessarily the sorts of licenses that we'll be able to use in an enterprise environment. Most of them are for non-commercial use, which can be problematic. Great for playing around and doing your own stuff, but not necessarily good from a commercial perspective. We end up with a few big companies still controlling the entire market, which I think is incredibly dangerous. Monopolies are not ethical. That's why we have laws against them. If we're going to allow just a few companies to control such a massive paradigm shift in our use of technology and the impact it has on each and every one of our lives, then that needs to be more controlled and more measured and more democratized. The other issue from an ethical perspective, again, comes down to the motivation for using AI, as I touched on before. AI should not be used as a means to get rid of people. It should be used as a means to free up people to do other things, which are more important. I often say that with AI, we're like kids in a playground with hand grenades. We're playing with things we don't understand, and the risks are absolutely profound and extremely large and could be incredibly dangerous for society. And I'm not talking about AGI and Skynet and robots taking over the world. I'm talking about people losing jobs, people being subject to automated decisions which are false positives or are not appropriate and not ethical, such as the situation with the current medical insurance that we were discussing earlier. So we're already starting to see some incredibly profound impacts around AI. A young man from a very wealthy and influential family going to murder a CEO of an insurance company because of the unethical, or rumored allegedly because of the unethical use of AI. I mean, that's a pretty profound impact at this earlier stage in the movement of AI. Yes, AI has been around for decades, but this hype cycle is only a couple of years old, and already we're seeing somebody has been murdered as a result. And I'm not going to make any comments on that, whether he was right or wrong. I think there's, needs to be questions asked from both sides there. Obviously, it's not okay to go out and murder somebody, but it's not okay to deny people who need medical care just because it saves costs. Ethics is a huge issue when it comes to the use of technology. It always has been. We're going to see more use of things like AI in decision-making for hiring and firing people, which is hugely problematic. The technology is fantastic. Our use of it and our understanding of it is pretty lacking. As a result, we see it being misused. I fully support that. We are currently using AI incredibly irresponsibly in many situations. And of course, we're going to be seeing it used more and more by criminals and sovereign states that we may not agree with from a political perspective. Your Chinas, your Russias, your North Koreas, your Irans. The question of ethics is just going to explode over the next 12 months and continue to do so. And I don't think we're going to find any clear answers because there's a lack of leadership at the political level as well. There's just this scramble. We have to invest in AI. To hell with the consequences or potential consequences. If China's doing it, the US has to do it. If the US is doing it, Europe has to do it. So the hype train is from the ground up, right? From the lowest to the highest levels, we've got this train of hype, which isn't serving to do anything productive for the movement forward of society and the movement forward of these technologies so they can benefit us as opposed to control and manipulate us. So yeah, some huge issues coming in the next 12 months.
I will
be a downer, Max.
I honestly will be curious too, just from the nature of hype cycle and the nature of some of the pushback, if there will be a little bit of fatigue. I don't think the hype around AI is going away, especially from a marketing standpoint. Even yesterday, I saw a video ad made 95% by AI, just with an image. The comments weren't necessarily saying, why would you use AI to do this? It was like, there's something missing here. And you brought up the idea of content creation being hand in hand with AI, and we're all going to be consuming so much of it as we see this uptick of things like Sora and the additional use of generative AI in that capacity. I wonder if there will become a certain amount of fatigue on the consumer side that then drives us to pause and ask that question why a little bit more. And I don't think that question why is necessarily going to come from the companies that are pushing for efficiency. I think that question of why is going to come driven by some of the creative use cases of AI and the conversation. There was, a viral tweet, or I don't know what you call an X.
It still says tweet because that's what it is.
There was a viral tweet from somebody saying, I don't want AI to paint my pictures, make my movies, or produce my music. I want it to vacuum my house and do the things I don't want to do. And I think that there is a certain amount of that undercurrent that's coming, not necessarily driven by fear, but more asking the question why. I do think that will be very interesting to watch play out in terms of general sentiment towards fatigue of the AI hype, while at the same time that we'll see some of these like larger ethical, more like business use cases probably playing out in legal systems around the world as people push too far and those legal systems kind of try to rein in some of that. I think there will also be this counter fatigue of the hype and the question of why from the consumers of AI and AI content.
That did get me thinking a little bit when CGI started. A lot of people were like, you can tell, you can see, and why are they not just creating an actual movie? But some of the most popular movies have been CGI. I'm thinking Avatar, entirely CGI. Yes, there's real actors behind it as well, but it's the combination of the two. So I wonder if, especially on the consumer side, it will kind of auto level out. Is my guess that people will be like, this is acceptable, this is too much. We'll have to figure out, and there'll be a couple of hits, couple of misses. Overall, I fully agree with the fact that there's going to be this duality of how AI is perceived within different spaces and what will actually be too much AI for a lot of people's liking. As we start to wrap up, I think this conversation so far has been absolutely riveting. I wanted to have a couple of rapid fire questions, and I'll throw the first one out there, and either of you feel free to answer. It's about success stories. I've actually been part of a lot of AI success stories as well in 2024. Logistics optimizing customs processing, healthcare diagnostics really saving lives and having a huge impact, retail compliance and making that much more efficient so that funds can go out to make better products. What are your success stories that you guys have heard in 2024 or even been a part of that really made a change for you?
I think from my perspective, agentic AI and automation workflows are proving incredibly useful in my industry, the compliance and law side of things. Law is quite complex and can be quite a dry read, right? So having to read everything yourself from page one to the end is not necessarily fun. They're also incredibly long. If you ever read a legal judgment from the European Court, for example, they're quite long and tedious to get through. I enjoy reading them, but I only have so many hours in the day, right? And I only have so much time that I can commit to that level of work. The ability to start using AI more in my workflow, and more excitingly for me over the next 12 months, will be using AI to file thousands of lawsuits against companies behaving irresponsibly and unethically. This year has been a real interesting step into AI for me. I've studied AI for decades, but to actually use it in my work, it's been an interesting step. But next year is when it gets really exciting because I can take the work I've done this year and then put it to other uses. So when I'm auditing websites with AI, I can use the evidence to file a massive number of lawsuits, which to me is the only way we're going to see any meaningful change with regards to compliance, because regulatory penalties don't impact the big companies at all. So we've just got to take them to court. We've got to hit them in the wallet. We've got to hit them in the reputation. And the ability to do that now as an individual, as opposed to requiring a big law firm, is becoming much easier. So a lot of success there from a compliance perspective, but it's still issues around ethics and misuse and irresponsible use of AI to overcome in this space as well.
I think from a success standpoint and opening of opportunity, one of the areas that I am most interested in is the healthcare side and the ability to augment, looking at scans, being able to provide access to healthcare at a different level, being able to sequence genomes to provide like personalized medicine, all of these things that I think over the next 10, probably 5, but certainly 10 years are going to completely change the world of healthcare. And again, this is different being across different countries and the like, but even I live in an area where there's an incredibly great health system. We've got lots of hospitals and doctors around, but it's still incredibly difficult to get in and see a doctor and a specialist specifically for certain things. And, the time to solve problems or get care is often one of the most dangerous things, again, depending on what you're fighting. So I'm really optimistic about the opportunity that we have for personalized healthcare and the abilities that's going to open up for us. There's a new company that's in beta that my husband and I tried out called Functional Health. You get a traditional blood test twice a year, but you get a bunch of blood tests. They have an app, and it's like a tech company from that standpoint that gives you all of your biomarkers and whether you should be concerned about something to then follow up with specifics to your doctor. Things like the Aura Ring, where you can check in and see if you're getting sick. All of these things that are advancing with technology in the background have the opportunity to improve the human experience at the fundamental level of health so substantially. Having had multiple family members, have battles with cancer or those types of things, like there are companies now that can give you a blood test and tell you whether you have any of the top 12 killing cancers very early and detect them and get ahead of it. And those things are going to have such an impact on society that I can't help but be excited about the fact that we're going to have more tools at our disposal to help take care of the humans that are in the world and help us improve that experience.
I just want to follow up on what Emma said, and I agree with everything you said, and I do a lot of work in healthcare. My two biggest clients are in the healthcare sector, one in clinical trials, one in medical technology around female reproductive health. So it's an area that I know very well from a technology and compliance perspective, but also with the benefits of personalized healthcare, we have to be very aware of the consequences. These technologies will be used for personalized viruses as well as personalized healthcare. They'll be used as weapons. The data collected and processed by these AI models will be sold and resold to many companies, many of them who do not have your best interests at heart. So for denying insurance claims, as we discussed earlier on, or for increasing insurance premiums, et cetera, denying you access to the workforce, denying you access to economics, things like loans or mortgages to buy a house because your genome says something about you, which has been shared with these companies. As we saw with companies like 23andMe, who were prosecuted for selling your genetic data to insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. So I think we need to be really careful about the consequences and not just focus on the benefits. I'm very excited, and one of my clients is using AI to detect breast cancer and various other cancers, and it's working incredibly well. The downside is, where does this data go from that point? All the data needs to be monetized. Everybody wants to monetize the data. That means data is going to be sold and shared with companies that we may not necessarily agree with. Companies like Palantir, for example, who have a very strong position in the defense market, also have their fingers in all of our healthcare pies across the EU generally, and even more so in the US. As much as I love the way that technology is going from a benefit perspective, I'm always sat in the background thinking, well, what about the risks? What about the consequences? We know that these companies are going to do this with the data because they've been doing it for the past 20 years. They're not going to stop now because the data is worth even more now than it was 20 years ago, because everybody wants data to continue training the models. And we're seeing a shortage of publicly available data as a result of things like OpenAI sucking up the entire internet. So yes, I agree with what you said on the benefits, but we must be vigilant of the potential consequences as well.
Oh, I just said there's always a yin and yang. So I definitely recognize that.
That's why I wanted to have both of you guys here. That was intentional to get both sides of the story, and it's worked out really well.
That sums it up very nicely, the yin and yang, and I think that's, it brings it just to the point that it's good to have this discussion and have both sides and then come to find the balance. So let's give the audience one last key takeaway from you, or one piece of advice for AI leaders today from each of you.
My biggest piece of advice to anybody is to build that digital literacy. And you don't have to become somebody that knows how to write a line of code or develop a solution. You don't need to be going out and creating your own AI agents, but you do need to understand the fundamental level of the technology that's shifting and changing and rapidly evolving and how it impacts you. Spend time listening to podcasts like this, reading books that are going to help you understand where your skill sets will fit in the world of AI, discussing some of these ethical considerations or how to suss out what solutions are fact and which ones are fiction or hype. Spend that time educating yourself and building that digital literacy or digital fluency. That is the foundation of being able to use this technology responsibly, use it to actually solve real problems, but then also at the societal level, remove some of the fear surrounding AI and technology so we can all start having a conversation about shaping the world in the way that we want to, as opposed to allowing the technology to happen to us.
I think from my perspective, we have these amazing tools at our fingertips that can be used for incredible good and incredible benefit to society. But you don't use a sledgehammer to do fine upholstery, right? You use a tack hammer. And I think this is the thing we need to start thinking about. Look at the problems and find the appropriate solution. You don't have to go to OpenAI for every AI solution. You don't have to go to a big proprietary company to solve all your problems. And one of the things I love about the work ABBYY does is the focus on finding the right tool to do the job appropriately. If that means using small language models, you don't need to be sucking up the resources of the planet and causing massive damage to the environment to run an AI prompt which requires very limited resources. There's no need to be using a large language model in those circumstances. So choose the right tool for the job as opposed to just seeing a nail and taking the biggest hammer you can to it. Just because you've got a hammer, it doesn't mean everything's a nail. And it doesn't mean that the hammer is the appropriate hammer for that nail in the first place.
Yeah, then let's wrap it up. And I think to sum it up again, it all starts with great humans, either if it's great ideas or great tech. And I think this discussion was really inspiring. And
Yeah,
thanks
thank you
for
guys.
having.
Thank you so much for joining us. I want to turn it over to the audience now. Give us your comments, your feedback on the riveting discussion that we had with Emma and Alexander. Share them with us in the comment section, over LinkedIn, over social media. Reach out to all of us, I would say, if you got any follow-up questions. But thanks for tuning in to the AI Pulse. And I look forward to having both of you guys, perhaps, 2026, and see how the world has changed, and we can have this conversation again and see if we've had to change our minds about a couple of things. But thank you guys so much for being on.
And everybody needs to read Life 3.0 by Max Vermeir. It's a fantastic book. And I think everybody who's interested in AI needs to read it because it's very balanced. So if you haven't read it yet, go out and read it. I don't get anything for recommending it, but it's one of the most influential books I read on AI in the last couple of years.
Thanks again, and hope to talk to you soon.